Welcome everybody. I'm Lucian Fogoros. I'm the co-founder of IIoTWorld, and I want to thank you the speakers for today, and thanks the 120 country represented here from with a couple of thousand people. I want to let you know all sessions are live, so please make sure you get familiar with the Zoom. Post your question in the chat option there, in a Q&A, and also you can elaborate where you're from in a chat if you like. All the folks that post questions in the Q&A will be invited to join our VIP community. So without further ado, I'd like to invite the moderator for this session. Patrick, the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lucian. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for all of you from around the world and your various time zones. We appreciate you taking your time and joining us today for the discussion. So as Lucian said, please familiarize yourself with the tool. If you have not, just kind of look around. You'll find a Q&A section, a chat section. You can obviously direct message each other if you want. So get used to the tool. It's quite useful and it helps us. Post your Q&A stuff in there. We will, if you've got questions, by all means, we want to get to that. So hit us with questions as we go through the conversation. And I'll try to weave those in, but typically we hit them at the end. It kind of depends on, I'm toggling back and forth through the questions and the discussion. So I'll do what I can to try to address them as we go, but we'll definitely hit them at the end. And this wouldn't be possible, of course, without our sponsors. We've got the Building Cybersecurity Organization, Fortinet, Eurotech, Keyfactor, Verve, and Zona. And Zona's on this call with Bill. Okay, real quick, IIoTWorld is the leading authority on industrial IoT. IIoTWorld is a digital media outlet bringing the latest industrial Internet of Things and ICS cybersecurity, virtual conferences, and content to a global community of over 284,000 plus decision makers and influencers. IIoTWorld focuses on delivering daily insights on the industrial Internet of Things across multiple verticals. And online, IIoTWorld curates a series of virtual events that draw thousands of delegates, of which you are some. So, housekeeping out of the way, the topic for this session is current trends, threats, and potential solutions. It's a really wide run of topics. And we'll get to our panelists right away. So I'm going to just go down my list and have you all introduce each other. I'll cue you up. And we'll start with Ravi. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi, Patrick, and hi, distinguished panelists and guests all over the world. My name is Ravi. I'm the Associate Vice President with Larsen & Toubro Infotech, responsible for the practice, and I specialize in IT and IoT specific vertical. It's a pleasure to be in a great discussion today with Patrick and the rest of the panelists. Thank you, Patrick.
Fantastic. Osman, tell us about yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Usman Salim. I am a director in PwC Canada in our OT and IoT cybersecurity practice. Canada is one of PwC's centers of excellence for OT and IoT, and we cover everything from strategy to policy and governance development to implementation and managed services. Happy to be on the call today with our panelists and with all of you.
Fantastic. Bill from Zona, tell us.
Hi, Patrick. Yeah, Bill Moore. I'm founder and CEO of Zona. We provide a frictionless zero trust user access software platform that's built for operational technology, or OT. We're enabling secure remote operations in 25 countries across energy, oil and gas, manufacturing, as well as government.
Fantastic. Thank all of you for being here, panelists. So I'm going to jump right in. And we've got a really wide range of stuff to cover today. We're talking about threats, solutions, everything in the IIoT space. Perfect way to kind of kick this whole event off. So the first thing I'm going to ask is, how has digital transformation, we've heard of Industry 4.0, we all know, and it can mean different things to different people. So as we go down, kind of talk to us about what you think digital transformation means to you and your organization and how you think it's changed the OT security threat landscape. So what has this done to change our threat actors and how they behave? And Bill, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so obviously digital transformation means a lot of things that used to be air-gapped are now being brought online. We're seeing obviously a lot of IP-enabled devices in industrial Internet of Things that are now potentially being an attack vector if they're not properly secured and isolated on the OT network. So, there needs to be a different way of thinking about things in terms of making sure that a lot of these new sensors and things are being protected.
Okay. Ravi, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, Patrick, while Industry 4.0 is a boom, at the same time, it is from a cybersecurity angle, it's a bit of a pain. When I say this, when we look at today in the IIoT world, millions of the IIoT components are deployed as part of the digital transformation in any given vertical. Maybe it could be manufacturing, oil and gas, energy and utility. Pretty much in every the industry vertical, yes, Industry 4.0 is kicking. And at the same time, as Bill mentioned, there is no isolation between the IT and the OT world. With the advent of the with the IT and OT getting converged, we get to see more and more threat vectors, and it is important that how we first get to a kind of an asset discovery by itself, because today millions of IoT components, this essentially mean billions of threat vectors. And also with the 5G kicking in, the IoT will be a lot more reality, and we'll be able to realize, experience, and get the true value. But at the same time, we need to be cognizant about the cyber threats, that may come both from the outside in and inside out. When we look at, I would say that, one, as I said, the asset discovery itself is a bigger challenge. So how do we discover the assets and then do a continuous threat detection? Today, essentially, we need to be performing regular threat and vulnerabilities assessments, and then try and enhance the visibility of the entire the gamut of the components which are deployed in the IoT world. And then, it moves on. First is the threat discovery, asset discovery, and then to manage these threats on a continual basis. This is how the entire flow would go. In a nutshell, yes, it's great, but at the same time, a whole lot of the threat vectors, and how do we combat them with the newer the security tools, technologies that we can bring onto the board and bring a kind of a vigil on a 24/7 basis.
Okay. Now, Osman, your idea, your feel on the digital transformation and how the threat actors have changed, or the threats have changed?
Well, we are transitioning as part of a few things that are happening. As asset life cycles reach their end, we have organizations have a natural tendency to upgrade, and they're using new technology. And the traditional air gap environment that Bill mentioned is somewhat of a misnomer now, because there is no such thing as an air gap environment. We have devices that we bring in that have connectivity. Any device that we are connecting to in these environments either is connected to a network and or is connected to a device that is connected to a broader network. So that air gap environment really doesn't exist. And so when we have now all of these devices that are connected, they're using IP-enabled connections, in sort of a summary, the attack surface has broadened significantly, and it's broadened to a level that I think has increased threats, but we haven't really kept up with protecting that surface. So I think that's how the OT security threat landscape has changed, is that there are a lot of different ways and angles, and we're sort of doing this digital transformation on the technology side, but then the process and the people side of things, where the people who operate this technology and the processes we have in industry managing these environments day to day, that hasn't really changed too much, and it's a struggle for us to keep up with the technological advancement. So the threat landscape has changed, it's broadened, and introduces a series of challenges that Ravi mentioned.
Right. I would definitely agree. And it looks like some of the people in the chat agree as well, that the air gap just does not exist anymore. I see in a lot of cases, people will say they have an air gap and then they point to the firewall on the network diagram and like, okay, that's not an air gap. That's a segmentation point. But yeah, and then we went in a little bit about the vulnerabilities and the changing pace of innovation. And I'd like to touch on that just a little bit. So in the IIoT, IoT, OT world, and even the kind of adjacent IT being used as OT, kind of just T space, there's a tremendous amount of innovation. And it's really moving, as some say, faster than we can secure it. And that the threat actors will have an advantage over us trying to perform the defense capabilities just because we can't really wrap our arms around the level of breadth and depth of all of the different technologies that are going in place now. So thoughts on our ability to kind of keep up with the pace of innovation from a security perspective, like as our threats grow and our ability to really manage that pace of innovation against the pace of the security solutions. And Bill, I'll start with you again.
Yeah, this is a very complex problem. So, if you think about a lot of the systems that are on an OT network, whether it's an HMI, SCADA applications, different things that interface with PLCs, generally these are computers underneath, right? They may be customized to do certain tasks and things like that, but they're running maybe a flavor of Linux or Windows. They can communicate protocols like VNC or RDP. And if it's not configured correctly and zoned right through zones and conduits, or using Purdue model, which is really more of a way of segmenting it on the network side. But from a security perspective, you don't want to allow a protocol like RDP to go all the way out to the endpoint from your OT network, right? Because that's the number one attack vector for ransomware. And so you have to have a way of enabling, as the digital transformation goes on, enabling to be able to remotely operate these devices without exposing the network protocols themselves out to a remote user, right? And then the other thing that is starting to happen at the same time is what we used to be really more kind of hard-coded devices like PLCs are now, becoming software enabled. So being able to develop these in the cloud, CAD drawings and all these things. Yeah, virtualizing and then putting these down onto a small computing device and be able to swap out the PLC. So this is early times with that kind of things, but it's happening now in manufacturing. And so that compounds the issues, because now you have to contend with not just the devices that interface with PLCs or collect information from those, but now the PLCs themselves are more vulnerable. So when you deploy like that, so these are things that have to be taken into consideration. And obviously 5G, you're enabling these things to talk. You got to make sure that they're talking through a network that is not just beaconing out to the internet. It has to go through security layers, right, to go out. So
yeah. I see that a lot, where vendors have come in to install some new solution, and now there's a whole bunch of new 5G modems in your substation or your facility or your plant. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that happens a lot. Okay, and same question, Osman, we'll go to you next.
Well,
Yeah, Robbie, did you have something to chime in?
Yeah, sure. Just wanted to add on the, when we talked about the newer generation of the PLCs, yes, they are virtual. But when we look back the last 10 years or 20 years, there are legacy PLCs that are deployed, the RTUs, remote terminal units that are deployed. I'm a little paranoid about the zero-day threat vectors that may still persistent in these devices. For instance, when we do at the protocol level, if we see if there is an implementation error in the way the protocol has been implemented, for example, DNP3 or Modbus TCP. So here, unless we discover these zero-day threat vectors, like for example, buffer overflow or integer overflow or off-by-one error attack vector, memory leaks. So unless and until we perform as part of a new mandate from ISS Secure, they talk about embedded device security assurance as a program, by which the newer PLCs they are tested for communication robustness by a tool which is approved by the ISS Secure. It's called CRT, Communication Robustness Test, and In the industry parlance, we call it as fuzzers. So they pretty much search every space in the protocol and they see, hey, is there a buffer overflow, right? So that's the kind of a security assurance test which is essential. Either the OEMs like the Siemens and the Rockwells of the world should do for the exterior PLCs and RTOs, or within the lab, a large manufacturing should try and test these, perform these fuzzing to see if there are zero-day threat vectors, plug them up. Else, we are building the next generation IIoT on top of a very legacy platform, which means that your foundation is not very strong.
Right. I've got a couple of questions about that topic. I'm going to come back to that, but real quick, I want to get Osman's perspective on the pace of innovation and our pace of solutions and how they match.
Well, one thing I'll say is that legacy equipment in the OT environment is going to be a reality for years to come. I remember 10 years ago when I was designing OT systems, we were using technology, we were selling technology that was already 15 years old, and it has a lifespan of 20, 25 years, right? And you can even stretch it to more than that. So while it is for newer environments, it makes sense to have safety and security built in to devices. We're going to have to live with legacy systems, and we're going to have to build controls that cater to this sort of legacy equipment. And really, when we look at modern environments, connectivity is the foundation, right? So making sure that that network is structured in a way, that it's layered in a way that is, there's different security layers through the device layer, and then the PLC layer, and then all the way up to the corporate network. I think that's the foundation. And when it comes to keeping up pace with all of these new technologies that we love to talk about that are coming, one thing I'll say is that organizations need to get the basics right. And they need to get their network configured properly. There are architectures out there that they can use as guidance, the Purdue model being one of the ones that is probably most widespread here in North America. So you need to get the foundations of the network right, and then work really on quick wins, right? Like OT systems and OT equipment and IIoT equipment for that matter. There's this term in the industry, insecure by design. They're built on protocols and they're built on practices that never had security as a design feature, right? And so when you have these devices that are using protocols that are open, that can be read, that have absolutely no encryption in some cases where you can just sniff the data traffic off of them, they need to be protected first and foremost from a network perspective. And then the other thing is that there are quick wins that really don't require a lot of effort. And I think it gets organizations a bit of the way. So how do we keep pace with the innovation? Well, firstly, get your basics right. Secondly, work on these small wins that are simple configuration changes, that are simple. It might be just disabling ports that you don't use. It might just be enabling encryption in your data traffic, for example, if the feature is available. Or it might just be putting your OT equipment behind a firewall that doesn't expose the IP addresses, right? If you do that, and of course passwords, don't get me started on those. Don't use shared passwords on your site. Don't use passwords that are default from the OEM. It'll be surprising to people who are new to this space that these practices still exist. That operations teams and even security vendors don't have the most sophisticated, they're on the most sophisticated with respect to cybersecurity. And on a typical industrial site, you'll have, dozens, if not more, vendors that are coming in, third parties, service providers, subcontractors, and then contractors of subcontractors. And so that point about remote access that Bill was making, that's very important too. So making sure that that network architecture is set up in a way that compensates for the inherent insecure by design of OT equipment. I think that's the foundation, and then working our way up. You can't really layer on or throw technology to a problem that has fundamental issues. So I think we start from the ground up. I think is probably the way we keep pace with the innovation, and then once we have that foundation correct, then we can increase our pace to catch up.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from everyone is that this is not an easy thing to do, to try to keep up with the pace of innovation with our solutions. And we're dealing with a range of legacy issues in addition, because that's the foundation, and we're adding this new technology, because if the legacy systems already have problems, and we know they do, and Ravi, to your point, I would love to see all of them actually get fuzzed and get tested, but they're already installed. And our ability to do that is not as great as we'd like. And in some cases, it's going to be the same device, but different firmware levels are going to have, wildly different results. So I would love to say we could do all that, but that's a challenge. In addition to the pace of the new technologies coming in this same thread, I wanted to kind of get a feel for your sense. I want to say, I think it was yesterday, maybe the day before, the US started down the path of doing like a cybersecurity rating. So you've heard of like Energy Star for appliances, and it says, the appliance uses this much energy and it's this efficient over the lifespan of the device. Something like that. And I hate to use the word cyber star, but it's something like that, where they give it like a security rating, kind of an out of the box capabilities, functions. You're buying this device and it's probably going to come to you this secure, on some sliding scale. What are your thoughts about actually rating IIoT products like this? And Ravi, I'll start with you.
Well, Patrick, this is a very good thought, and this is doable. See, already, the likes of the Siemens, Rockwell, Allen Bradley, pretty much, they have been mandated a new PLC to come out of the factory. It has to be tested, assured with, communication robustness test, as I told you, which is a tool approved by the ISA Secure as part of the Embedded Device Security Assurance Program. So that means, hey, the future ones are great. But taking a step back, Patrick, you said, hey, the ones which are already deployed, the last 2 decades or 3 decades, still there is a way to do. What we can do is, pick up a PCAP, a sample traffic of an hour or two, and then, we can run these on a fuzzer, and you need not to do a first testing on the production environment. Just take, through a span port, pick up the passively the traffic of an hour, perform the first testing on a fuzzer, and then see if there are zero-day threat vectors. You could go back and tell the Rockwell, hey, I found a 0-day, like a buffer overflow or an integer overflow. And they can actually go back to the test bed and see on a specific PLC, we found a 0-day. Then there are high chance that, the OEM will bring a patch to that vulnerability that have been discovered. But this is a continuous activity. As you said, past 2-3 decades, we have deployed left, right, and center in every corner of the industry verticals. So this essentially means that, yes, there should be a standard, like the way, in the IIoT components. Today we talk about certification, right? So these are certified components, and there is an identity for every identity of everything. On a similar line, an assurance or a certification or a seal to say that, hey, this is tested for all vectors. And maybe with the ISA Secure having come forward for the OT devices, if they can extend the horizon even to the IIoT components, in my opinion, that would reduce the kind of an aggression, because today, as we all know, it is millions, and then it will go to billions of IoT components. This would only take us to trillions of threat vectors, which means that we have to plug at the grassroots level, at the OEM level, and that assurance, in my opinion, should help. This is one part. Maybe if I just take another 1 more minute. See, there are a whole lot of other legacy issues. Today, we go to any plant, they are either on a flat network or just they have tried VLAN. Even VLANs are extremely highly vulnerable. So today, as we speak, we look at microsegmentation, network segmentation, pico segmentation, this would only mean that, yes, you can contain an attack if it all happens. You're not going to propagate the attack at all. I mean, this could be one. And the other probable solutions would be like bringing a layer of deception, build decoys of, a PLC lookalike PLC inside a plant. If an attacker lands in, he or she wouldn't know whether it's a legitimate PLC or not. So I highly recommend bringing deception technology. Likewise, there are a bunch of solutions that we can talk as the time passed by today.
Yeah.
These are one or two key elements which I thought we should bring in.
Okay. Yeah. And there's a bunch of, that could be an entire discussion on just whether or not you want to use deception technologies, because now you're introducing more things into your network. So that's an interesting one. We could have a conversation on that, kind of like responsible disclosure as well. So just bigger topics, maybe for another thread. And Bill, your thoughts on this? I mean, do you think we can actually get to a place where you can pre-certify products when they come out to give the customer or end user a better idea of what they're getting? And does it help?
Yeah, sure, it helps, right? I mean, it's sort of defense in depth. I think, Osman alluded to the legacy products that are still out there, kind of contending with that. I mean, I've seen, HMIs that you couldn't put a password in greater than 7 characters. It's just old. It's just not, when we talk about, lack of secure by design, that's a pretty good example. So that definitely needs to be taken into consideration, obviously. And then I think, the key here, I think, really is being able to separate IT from OT, and making sure that the way everything is designed and segmented, there's really 2 big parts of this. One is the network layer. Obviously, you can go down to the sensor layer and things in zero in the hardware of the design itself. But once you kind of get back from that, you have the network layer and the segmentation, and as Ravi mentioned, and pico segmentation, all that. But then the other part of this is the user access layer, right? So how are users interacting with this equipment, right? And the key here is making sure that the data communication protocols, because a lot of these, some are maybe using Modbus TCP, but others that are running these computing systems are running SSH, VNC, RDP, and so forth. So you don't want those protocols to be traversing through the IT network and hopefully not out to the internet, right? So, obviously we go out on Shodan and, you can see things out there that are potentially ways into these critical networks. So, there's going to have to be a solution that kind of that overlays or a combination of solutions that overlay on that, both on the network segmentation side as well as the user access layer. And that goes for, internal to the plant, east-west, as well as north-south, right? So, sometimes I think that gets that's missing sometimes because these networks are very complex in the way that the zones and conduits are kind of configured, right? So, yeah, that's what I would say is that I think it's Ravi's right? I mean, we got to build more security into these devices, but in the meantime, while we have this combination of newer devices and legacy devices, we have to be able to put the right controls in place at the network and user access layers. So,
okay, Osman, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the certification of devices definitely helps. I think it's a starting point. It I don't want to say it's a double-edged sword because it also gives the false sense of security. One thing to keep in mind is that in the cybersecurity world, regardless, if you'd like to admit it or not, the attackers they have a head start. They're already on to the next thing. And so this concept of limiting the attack or a potential attack is always, in my mind, that should be central to cybersecurity and managing cybersecurity risk. The other thing I'll say is that anyone who claims to have fully secured your systems in sort of the context of attackers are always ahead, anyone who comes out there and say, oh yeah, I can do X, Y, and Z and completely secure your systems, run away from that person fast, right? Because the reality is that when dealing with cybersecurity, it's all about reducing your risk to a level where it's manageable and acceptable. Cybersecurity attacks are going to happen. We're not going to stop them entirely. Some of them might be due to poor practices and just not getting the basics right, which, you know, shame on us for not making those basic changes. But some of them are going to be way too sophisticated, and we're not going to be able to stop them. So limiting that attack in a way that your environment is still functional, in a way where you can effectively discard that affected part of your operations, I think that should be a key consideration. And then looking forward to something Ravi said, using deception technology and going a little bit on the offensive, I think is absolutely something that needs to be considered in the future once you've got your basics right. I also don't want to say that there's one way to do this, or you just need to focus on the basics. We need to do a little bit of both. It needs to be a top-down and a bottom-up approach. Mm-hmm. We should absolutely be looking to technology that will deflect attacks as well, like deception technology. The other thing I'll mention, something that Bill said about user access. A lot of the incidents that happen, especially ransomware attacks, they are you can trace it back to how users and people are accessing and using the OT environment and the devices. Right. And so it's also very important to manage that user access and make sure that you have people or users, whether they're people or systems or services or otherwise, that are properly authenticated, that use secure protocols, and they're properly vetted. And then there's also a way to access how they're accessing the OT environment and what they're doing. So it's a combination of those things. But I think to your original question, do these certifications of actual devices help? Yes, they do. That's one part of the equation. But we cannot underestimate the people that are using these and the processes that we have in place. And Bill, just your comment about the passwords, I've seen, I saw an OT system that didn't allow special characters, for example, and it was a 6-character limit. So okay, yeah. that should be really easy for someone to guess.
Yeah, I've seen some with a numeric pin of 4 spaces, and that's all you got. Like not even letters. It was just a numeric pin. Yeah. I've even seen some where there is no password. You just basically put your DB9 in and hit the enter twice, and you got a session right there. Yeah. So we're dealing with some pretty ancient devices. Go back to those refrigerator-sized RTUs and that kind of thing that are still out there, right? Okay. So what I'm hearing is basically all of you are in favor of something that gives kind of a certification of a product when it's released, and that's kind of what I'm hearing. And you did mention, Osman, the false sense of security. And when I hear counter arguments to something like this, I too am in favor of it, but I am also, I would say my biggest concern is the false sense of security when someone buys this that is, granted, a lot of organizations, they don't have a security program. In fact, they may have somebody that, gets to wear the security hat sometimes, not even a full-fledged security team by any stretch. I've seen in some cases literally where the person who's mowing the lawn is also the network engineer who is also your security person, right? And their ability to manage that piece of technology over time isn't the same as many others. So they're going to buy the best they can when they can, and then hope that it stays that way. And its ability to stay that way, I think, is what we're really most concerned about. Is yes, it should come out with a security rating at the beginning, but then over time, how does that stay secure as well? I've also heard from some of the product manufacturers about how this may stifle innovation. Not sure I'm totally on board with their discussion there, but nonetheless, I think it's an interesting thing to see, and it sounds like we're all in favor of it as well. So that's good to hear. I did want to mention, we talked about, Ravi, you talked about capturing PCAPs, and those of us that have been in these environments, there are, in some ways, it's difficult just to get visibility into them. In some cases, they are just serial traffic, right? Until they come back to an aggregation point where it's converted to IP and we can get access to that traffic. It's not a lot of serial-based sniffers out there or similar technologies. So one of the questions we've got in here is visibility for the OT networks. For all of us, and even Bill, in your world with the user transactions, we want to see some of that user behavior as well. So how do we get visibility into these networks to actually see what's going on in both new environments? Much easier, right? But how do we do this in both our legacy, historical legacy world and that new space? Because everyone is going to have some network that's converged between both of those worlds, unless you're somehow some brand new startup company and you're able to buy up all your digital stuff from day one. But so Osman, I'll start with you. Tell us, if you're going to lay out some visibility for a network like this that's got both, because most do, and what they're looking for in terms of visibility, what would it look like?
That is a very, very important question. And the answer that I'll give is that it is a combination of technology and process. Mm-hmm. Inventorying your OT environment is like you said, easier for newer equipment. But then you also have devices in your environment that are not connected. You have devices that are remote, that someone has to sit in a vehicle and drive all the way. So managing that inventory is not possible just by technology. Now, one of the things that we do for our clients is that we have the ability to test out some of the main OT security solutions out there, and we run these proof of concepts, as we call them, for a period of like 3-4 months, where we deploy these solutions and then we gather the results and then we go back to our clients. And we found that with respect to asset inventory, all of these solutions are at best 50 to 70% with respect. That's the number of devices that they will identify. So when it comes to knowing your environment, it needs to include your technology, because it'll get you halfway there at least. And then there also needs to be regular procedures in place to make sure that you're keeping that asset inventory up to date. So it's really about building an asset management program that doesn't need to be too complicated, but at the same time, we can't just throw technology at a problem and expect to solve it. And then also, one of the things that, we've touched on this a few times now about remote access and just the third-party risk of vendors, suppliers, contractors. Having a remote access solution, I think, is very important in these environments. There are secure ways of doing it, and then there are, compensating controls that we can put in place for remote access. And those compensating controls are what we would need to provide remote access to legacy systems, right? So I think organizations need to look at asset management seriously, and it needs to be a program rather than just one or two technologies that are thrown into this issue, and we can't expect that to resolve the issue.
Right. Okay, Bill, you're on the human side of the world. We've touched a little bit about that. Tell us more. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just kind of add on to what Osman was saying about third-party access, because that's a big issue operationally and from a security perspective. So operationally, there's always this mismatch in access methodology between an organization and its OEMs, vendors, or contractors, and so forth, right? They may have one type of VPN or VDI, or combination of VPN, VDI, those types of things. So, how do you extend that access so that they can troubleshoot or be able to update, patch their devices, right, in a simple way without, and when I say, simple and secure, enabling them to do multi-factor authentication without saying, oh, you got to load this VPN client or this agent on your desktop, which is a non-starter, right? And that becomes a political discussion usually. between CISOs or whatever between the
Yeah.
organizations. So the idea is that you want to be able to provide kind of a way of doing this through standard clients that everybody has, like a web browser, and be able to access and be able to provide modern multi-factor authentication and so forth that you can access into that, right? Using hardware tokens, DOTP, things like that, right? So, and if you're going through the IT environment, through an IDP, is be able to register through that and then go down the OT environment. So you need this flexibility, that because in some cases it's going to be an OT only type of access where it's a hub spoke environment and they're not going through IT, so it's not really converged IT OT in terms of the authentication authorization system. So you need to have that flexibility, and so that's one of the big things that obviously we do here at Zona, but it is a really it's a complex issue, right? When you bring in the third parties and being able to know that, and the other operational aspect of it too, not just the security, is that in a lot of these environments, the OEM has kind of free reign. They've taken sort of control over all of their machinery, and the organization is not really up to speed, and has lost control over their own network just to a certain degree, right? Because the OEMs have put in all of the devices, they built everything, all of the process control network, and that becomes another issue that I think becomes a security issue, obviously, because now you've put complete trust in your third party, and how secure are their systems and their processes, right? So even if you've implemented really secure processes. So I just want to add on that, because that's kind of a discussion in itself, but the third party access is a big area. Yeah.
The backdoors are sometimes very sneaky too, where during construction or some work that's going on, there'll be a cell modem that's connected for remote access, which is perfectly understandable for a vendor.
Yep.
But then they'll leave that in for later. So those are the sort of things, if you don't have a visibility into your environment, it's easy to slip through the cracks.
Yeah. Extended support. Yeah, Ravi, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, great points from both Bill and Osman. I just like to take an extension to, from a visibility and creating a kind of a single pane of glass view of, I completely agree with Osman that, when you do a asset discovery, you would be able to do about 60 to 70%, because, a master switch, managed switch may not really be connected to multiple parts of a plant or any vertical that we take, which means that one, we should use IEC 62443 as a standard and use a checklist-driven manual assessment. You need to pretty much be onto the plant, onto the network, and do the asset discovery, create a kind of a CMDB, like how we have on the IT side of the CMDB. How can we create an OT side of the CMDB is one I would recommend. And then at the end of the day, these syslogs should be ingested into a SIM platform for a 24/7 eye on the glass monitoring, which essentially means that, these are, let's say we ingest these traffic on a Splunk or a QRadar or any of the SIM platform, the use case development itself will be a key challenge. Because today, you have, within LTI, we talk about 24,000 plus use cases that are there for all the enterprise side of the detection use cases. But on the OT side, one has to build ground up, and once you build, then the detection capability can be enhanced. My vision is, a SOC analyst should not distinguish an IT and an OT alert. We have to train the analysts and make sure that they are able to detect the OT side of the threats, because there are quite a few tools which can do continuous threat detection, but there's a whole lot of noise that requires to be curated, fine-tuned, correlated on a SIM platform. And then if 80 to 90% of the noise can be solved, where the power of the AI, machine learning, they can actually eventually solve these noise levels. And then only the true positive incidents, if they can be viewed, that means, we not only brought the level of visibility, but we are also be able to go a little ahead of being reactive, from reactive to being proactive, which means, we are able to see the incidents. And another point that I would like to add here is, the power of the threat intelligence, contextual threat intelligence, ingest those threat intel into the SIM platform so that you will be able to, these curated intelligence can exactly tell you who are the threat actors, what is the motive behind, which part or parts of the network is being impacted. And then, finally the incident response team, if they have the essential playbooks and the standard operating procedures, they should be able to handle even a P1 incident. Because, in some of my experiences so far, we have attained a true convergence where we were able to put together the IT, OT, and IoT, the logs into a SIM platform, and we were able to build use cases. Then we are able to identify, the IOCs and IOAs, perform a kind of a proactive threat intelligence-led hunting, and then, it's like, from reactive to proactive, which means that, if there is for example, in the recent past, there was Ponte ransomware, the attack that the ransomware attack vector that came in. Can we test against the environment, both, on the IOCs and the IOS, and then can we detect those and make our detection capability a lot more superior, which means that, yes, the true IT-OT convergence can be met, but it's a journey. I would never call it as a destination.
Right. I don't think any of us would. That's well said. And with, as you mentioned, one of the phrases I hear from the people that have implemented a lot more network visibility, sometimes it takes some re-architecture of the network. They're using everything from taps, hopefully, but span ports if they need to get this kind of visibility. But what I end up hearing is something along the lines of the more you see, the more you see. And it gives you this, this interesting problem where you have a spike of false positives and other things you have to ferret out. And that just that process in and of itself is, though difficult, very educational to help understand your own network. And in addition to the security benefit of getting that visibility, you also get the operational benefit in some cases, because now you'll know why did that PLC keep having that strange hiccup every quarter, and you find this rare process that runs, and for some reason it's sending some, I don't know, packet that's just wrong or something like that, or a command issue that's wrong. So there is a lot of benefit there.
And one more point I want to add before you move on.
Yeah.
So the other critical aspect that we all have not spoken so far is, the insider threats. Even in an OT environment, there are behavior-based anomalies, right? For example, today a PLC password, maybe it's a combination which is with 2 or 3 operators. But if they come together and they tamper the logic of a PLC, for example, a motor which is supposed to run at 5,000 RPM,
right,
it can go up to 8,000 RPM, which is the logic that is set, and someone changes to 100,000 or 20,000, which means, there can be a catastrophe. There can be a havoc in the plant, and, it can endanger even the safety of people, which means, can we have a mechanism to do any change to a PLC? Can there be an alert? The alert can be true positive or a false positive, but an alert is an alert.
Yeah.
That is something which I highly recommend, especially in complex manufacturing. If there are hundreds of people, who are on the shop floor, and someone makes metal with something, and then, if that detection don't happen. In short, human behavior-based anomaly detection, process integrity, these are the 2 additional elements, in my opinion, should save some of, the catastrophe that can come in our way.
Yeah, and I have seen some technologies that can do that as well. But yeah, whether it's insider threat or even in some cases, I've seen the same issue with remote facilities. Like there's a break-in at the remote facility, and maybe there what appeared to be some vandalism, but we have no idea if they actually tampered with the devices while they were there in a lot of cases. So there's no way to know. But yeah, that's important. Okay, we talked about. Yeah, I did want to get to the concept of, we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but I want, real quick before I leave that, another note for myself. Someone mentioned in the chat thread about people, process, and technology. I heard all of you mention the same thing about how they have to work together. There was a little bit of touch on the I guess, the business process components. And obviously one of the best examples is Colonial Pipeline, where they had to shut down their OT environment because of the business process elements on the IT side, and they couldn't end up reconciling billing and some other things. So they ended up having to shut that down. But there was also this concept of, I forget who mentioned it, I'm sorry, but the ability to kind of segment off components of your network so that other elements can continue to run. And I think the best, I guess, term I've heard for this is intelligent islanding. So you can kind of keep the system running. But I've also heard good friend Mark Bristow calls it turtle mode, where you just clamp down the shell and kind of keep operating and open back up and see if things are safe. Thoughts on things like intelligent islanding or segmenting in ways that makes it possible to keep certain functions of your IIoT OT world running while other elements can I don't know, get run through with ransomware or some other thing? Because in most cases, we know that the attacks start on the IT side and work their way to the OT side, often through some human factor like Bill's talked about. But and Bill, I'll go with you next. So yeah, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, this Ravi probably has a little bit better understanding of these types of things, but I'll give it a shot here. I think that you know, from our perspective, you know, we really look at this as sort of segmentation from a user access standpoint, and you know, if there's systems that are one of the things that we are doing with asset discovery tools is we want to know what's going on in terms of all those assets. So if there is a compromise or something is happening where we're not sure if there's a vulnerability, we can input that data into our connection profiles and make those unavailable, for instance. So that's a way of saying, okay, hey, there's something going on in this segment of the network, and we'll be able to disable that as an available connection. You know, so that can, you know, dovetail into safety issues and things like that. So that's one of the things that we're working on right now with, you know, a couple of the asset discovery and vulnerability detection solutions that are focused in the ICS/OT space. So,
okay, yeah, awesome. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that it really depends on the nature of the OT environment. That if you have a section that is compromised, what are the interdependencies, and how does that plant or that OT environment work? So if the network can be architected in a way where you can shut off the affected area and then keep operations running, you know, that would be the ideal case in managing your risk. And we have, not so much in critical infrastructure, but in other industries, the idea of a software-defined network and sort of this perimeter-less boundary, right? Because your IT, your IoT assets typically now are anywhere from on-site to virtual to in the cloud. So that type of a software-defined perimeter where you can change the boundaries as and when you need them is I think an excellent idea, and I think it's going to be a very practical idea now that we're seeing more and more cloud applications running in the OT environment. One thing that I do want to mention, and this ties back to also to Ravi's earlier point about you know, threat intel and SOC and having IT and OT, is one of the things that organizations find really challenging is talent management, right? We conducted a survey here in Canada, about 200 business leaders that are focused on OT. And one of the biggest challenges they have, in fact, the biggest challenge that they had was addressing the skills gap. Now, this is the skills gap that is IT and OT. And that's why I think having the right partners to assist you in this cybersecurity journey, and it is a journey like Ravi said, it's important to have the right partners with the right skill sets. When you're dealing with alerts, when you're dealing with notifications that are coming out of these monitoring solutions, half of the process is to eliminate those false positives. We had a client that was running operations and had security monitoring solutions, that continuous threat detection tool running on several sites, and they had 2 people looking at multiple sites, and they were dealing with thousands of alerts. And they tried to manage it, they just couldn't. They just didn't have the time or the bandwidth. So I think having the right partner to assist you and using these advanced techniques that the IT SOC already has around machine learning and automated false detection and reducing false positives, I think that's also very necessary. The other thing that's specific to OT when it comes to SOC operations is that eliminating false positives and eliminating or just identifying the alerts that matter at level 1 might be possible for an IT SOC analyst to do, and you could train them. But when it comes to actually investigating what the issue is, you do need someone who is versed in that particular OT process, right? If it's a mining site, the person needs to know that operation. If it's an oil and gas, it needs to, the person that sees that alert and that data point or whatever alert that's come up needs to know something about that process in order to handle that alert. The other thing also is you may need to get safety authorities involved, right? Depending on the nature of it. And to your point about business decisions or business process, many times it will be a business decision, and we've seen instances where organizations have said, you know what, we have had an incident. They didn't have this dynamic perimeter, or they didn't have the ability to isolate the segment of network that was affected. So they said, you know what, we're going to lose, I'm just picking a number, like $1 million a day. So you know what, we're willing to take on that risk, to let operations run with our compromised systems. And we're going to go ahead with it. So I think that's also a reality. And these solutions and incidents that happen in the OT environment, it's when you have a hindsight view into it, it's very easy. But in the moment, there needs to be active decision making in the heat of the moment. And there are other practices that can help with that. But I think managing your risk and knowing what that is going to be key when you have an incident and being prepared for it.
Okay. And Ravi, we were almost out of time. Can you squeeze in a real brief answer for us?
Sure, I'll just take 30 seconds. Patrick, see, one extension to this is, I call it as security insights. When I talk about security insights, there are, as Osman also talked about, so much of fatigue in the operations. Can we handle one alert only once? Suppose if there is a repeat of that alert, the machine should do that. In the sense, how do we automate those alerts? How do we deduplicate and then remove the noise levels and reduce the fatigue in the operations? But that there are a number of tools that I have seen, which helps you in creating that security insight and reduce all the noise, 70 to 80% of the noise that we were able to reduce. We could reduce even cut down on the number of people. For example, a SOC which I used to run with 50 people, I could bring down to 30, purely by bringing some level of, this security insight kind of a platform that helped us to reduce. So I leave the floor here, given the time constraints, Patrick. And in short, yes, security insight will be the last leg in the overall efficacy enhancement.
Okay, thank you. I've got one quick question before we end. One word answer from all of you. Your favorite IoT, IIoT security standard or framework. And Osman, go first.
I'm going to say NIST has some good guidelines, so around IoT. Yeah.
NIST, okay. And Bill?
Yeah, I mean, IEC 62443, 3-3, yep.
Yep. Ravi?
IEC 62443.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Okay.
Awesome. Everyone, thank you so much for your time. Panelists, attendees, thank you so much for attending. We really appreciate it. Have a great day, everyone.